like as Miles used to always say, music has no friends. So you got to get the right guy, and if the right guy ends up being a pain in the ass, Miles would, and other great band leaders I've seen would, just deal with it.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. I'm really excited to bring you part one of our interview with the stellar Adam Holzman. We had the pleasure of catching up with Adam when he toured Australia with Stephen Wilson late last year, and that alone was an absolute pleasure. And I do highly recommend you check out the Rig tour with Adam. It gives some great context to what we talk about during these two episodes. Trying to nail down Adam's career, even in 90 minutes and two parts, is nearly impossible. It's just, we cover so much ground. But in this first part, we talk about Adam's last 12 months, his musical upbringing. There's some incredible anecdotes. His work with The Fence, his move into working with Miles Davis, and a whole much more, and a whole lot more in between. So I can't wait for you to listen to this first part. I'll let you jump in, and then I'll be back for the start of part two. Adam, it's so wonderful to see you, and thank you for joining us. You're one of those special people that I've had the pleasure of seeing in the flesh before I get to interview you. So, great to see you again.
Okay, nice to be here. Nice to see you again too, David.
Yeah, so look, I've witnessed firsthand what a busy sort of year or so you've had recently, and you've never not been busy. But just tell us initially about your last 12 months and what you've been up to, which I know has involved a lot of touring. But just give us a bit of an overview of Adam Holzman's last year.
Overview.
Yeah, true. Sorry, that wasn't even intentional.
No, it's cool. Let's see. Well, long story short, the year started with me having to hunker down in my studio, this place that you see right here, for about a month, just learning the music for Stephen's upcoming tour. And then I had to cram in a lot of practice time for my project with Nick Beggs and Craig Blundell, Trifecta, which was we did our debut performance at the cruise to the Edge, and that was a lot of work, a different kind of work for me, especially since I'm covering a lot of the melodies and chordal parts for that, so I really had to have it dialed in. And anyway, so we did the cruise, and it overall it went well, which is I'm glad to say. And then came home, and it was a time to start getting ready to shove off with Stephen.
Yeah.
And that ended up being, we left in mid-April. Well, at this point it's already mid-April.
Yeah.
And we rehearsed for about 2 weeks in not that far out of London, about a half hour outside of London, a little more maybe. It's in a theater. Oh, I know. The town is called Tring, Tring, and they have a kind of an art center where they put on plays and stuff like that. It's also a good place to rehearse. So we were set up there for a couple of weeks, and then we did our first gigs in Scandinavia. We started up in Sweden and Norway and started working our way down Copenhagen, then the bulk of Europe. So we did Europe for about, I don't know, we rehearsed for 2 weeks and did Europe for about almost 2 months. So
wow.
It's like 10 weeks or maybe more. And then we took a break. The last gig we did was Madrid. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if people are aware, but Stephen just released a high resolution mix of the Madrid gig. I think it might be an online thing. So that might be interesting to check out. That was exact midpoint of the tour. Then we did, starting about 2 months later, we did the United States and South America. And in between that time, I was very fortunate to do a Moog clinic and workshop in Venice, Italy. Beautiful. It's a beautiful yearly thing, part of a ongoing festival there. So I went to Italy and did that. So that was a nice change of pace. I've got a project over there too, some musicians I play with, called Big Bang Theory. And we named it before the TV show. But anyway, so it's been a pretty busy year. We came back, we hit the road with Stephen again. And I must say that the America, Canada, and South America legs of the tour were the best for me.
Great.
The band, everything was dialed in. No one was sick of it yet. We weren't completely fried yet. The music was just, we finally got to the point where it was really fun to play the new stuff, because the new stuff was very specific.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to get it right without having to freak out all the time. So we had gotten to the point where all of it was just really in the zone. And then we took a few weeks off and we flew to India and South America. India, the shows were great and the people were great, but it was such a hard gig for our crew.
Yeah.
And they had all kinds of problems with power and stuff like that. And it was just not an easy situation to function. I mean, it's pretty intense there. In some ways I love it, and in other ways it's kind of not so easy. Anyway, overall it was great. And the people there, people in India, they especially love, I think there's in addition to the progressive rock thing and Steven's whole crowd, there's a thread of real fusion fans too in India. And those are sort of, my people. So I'm glad, that's just part of the way it's, all the musical styles and different cliques and things kind of weave together there. It's definitely different than the States of Europe. But anyway, and then we went to Australia, which was awesome. I really loved Perth just as a city to hang out in. I mean, and I love the fact that it's the most isolated city in the world.
It is.
You really definitely feel like you got a little bit of elbow room there.
Yes.
So that was great. And Sydney, I think our last really, really good show, in my opinion, was the Sydney show. We played Brisbane the day after, and we were all just so fried. I think we did 3 or 4 days in a row of flying and playing the same day. And by the time we got to Brisbane, sounds like by the time we got to Phoenix, I don't know, I can't speak for other people, but I was starting to fall apart at that point. And so I really, but the show had a lot of good moments still. I mean, all the shows did. Even if I messed up, I would usually mess up in different places, each night. So it would keep the variety up.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's beyond debate, Adam, the level of energy and professionalism shown at every show. I mean, I was at that Sydney show, but I can only imagine at the end of the tour, as you said, how fried everyone is. You would not know it looking at any of you on the stage. It was just incredible. So, and I've talked about that in the introduction as well. So yeah, just amazing. We'll definitely come back to Stephen, obviously. So let's go back a decade or three, Adam, to your musical upbringing. So we're always keen to ask our guests about childhood and teenage years, what got you into music and keyboards and piano and so on in the first place?
Let's see. I was born into a musical family, but not what you would think. My father was the founder and president of Electra Records. So I was around the music side of it. It started off as a folk label, but then he, of course, moved into rock and signed classic bands like Love and The Doors and many others. The last band he signed before he left the label was Queen. So he definitely made a major mark in the music world and popular music world. And I was interested in playing. I grew up around the production side of it, which partly why I feel comfortable in a studio environment. I've basically been in one my whole life almost. I was interested in the other side of the glass, with the guys that are actually really making it happen. And I started playing a little bit of keyboard. I had one of those toy organs. They call it a chord organ, because you have buttons for certain chords on the side and then regular keyboard. But anyway, my hero became Ray Manzarek.
Yeah.
And I was this 11-year-old kid, just dazzled by hanging around with the Doors and not really, being on the sidelines for when they went from just signing to the label to becoming huge. And even Jim Morrison was always very nice to me. And he once, story's kind of been floating around for a minute, but one day in the Electra offices in LA, my dad ran into Jim, and Jim said, "Hey, so how's Adam doing?" At one point, and my dad said, "Oh, he's doing good, except today's his birthday and he's homesick from school." And about 8 o'clock that night, the doorbell rings, and it's Jim Morrison with his girlfriend Pamela, and they have a birthday present for me. It's this sort of kind of like an auto harp, sort of a stringed thing. Very cool. I still have it. And yeah, I mean, he came in and hung out for a little while and was just, I mean, I'd met him a few times and I'd never seen this wild side of him that everyone reads about and talks about. I don't think it happened as much as people want. I think I think people want to make a big deal about that stuff because it's sensationalist. But the fact is that he was a pretty quiet and normal guy more often than not. And every time I saw him, he was totally mellow. Yeah. Anyway, he was very, very nice and hung out. And so, I had a number of opportunities just to observe the rehearsals, and I went to a few sessions. And so the Doors were my heroes. And to be around that kind of scene when you're 11, 12 years old there's nothing like it, and I appreciate it more now. Back then it was just, life is life, don't really, didn't seem, didn't have anything to compare it to,
That's right. And I obviously with Ray, and I know it's hard as an 11 or 12-year-old to recall what you're actually perceiving at the time, but obviously Ray was an incredibly unique player and was obviously covering the bass lines and stuff like that. So if you had to sort of crystallize what did stand out to you from back then in watching him play, what would it be?
Right. Okay. Sorry to get onto the tangent with the Jim Morrison story.
It's great.
But I liked his bluesy / a little bit jazzy approach. And he was one of the only keyboardists at the time, besides Keith Emerson and Felix Cavalier. Stevie Winwood even came a little bit later. He was one of the only guys out of a handful of guys that took extended solos. Yeah. And he built them up, even though he wasn't like completely blazing 1,000-note riffs, like a Keith Emerson might or something like that. But he played tasteful melodic ideas that strung together and built up very logically. He managed to do that while he's playing the keyboard bass. The patterns he did on the keyboard bass were very straightforward, but he kept them steady. He kept them really locked in, and him and John Densmore, the drummer, were able to really lock in on that. So, that's a band right there. That's just John and Ray. It was a complete picture. And I think you can he kind of bookends the Doors' career in some ways. The solo in Light My Fire is, I think, a real keyboard 101 type of solo people should check out. And then the Fender Rhodes solo in Riders on the Storm.
Yeah.
I mean, he really, at that point, I think he'd been playing so much over the years. The first half of that solo sounds like something that Herbie Hancock could have played.
Yeah.
And then he goes into his more Doorsy kind of stuff near the end. But, he really, again, managed to build on a lot of really creative ideas, doing certain things with intervallic stuff, and certain scales. And then at the right points, going back to something bluesy, So it's, it's one of the great rock keyboard solos for sure. Absolutely. Anyway, so I was fortunate after that. We're talking about years later, 6-7 years later. Me and my buddies, we were in our late teens, early 20s, had a good band together called The Fence. And Ray hired us to play on his record Carmina Burana. He was going to he collaborated with Philip Glass, believe it or not, on a rock version of Carmina Burana, and he hired The Fence to be the backup band. Wow. Philip Glass had other key players and stuff too. So I didn't play on as much of it as I would have liked, but I am on there. But yeah, they used my bass player, drummer, and guitar player. And it was, what was cool about the project was hanging out with Ray.
Yeah.
Sometimes at rehearsal, we would just start jamming on something like Love Me Two Times or something like that. And we would go out the door and there would be 15 people right outside the door with their heads glued to the wall, checking it out, because he was the man,
It was.
But yeah, I kept in touch with Ray over the years, and I still have a real healthy respect and admiration for the groundbreaking stuff he did do.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. No, thank you. That's an amazing sort of tangent we went off on there. It's brilliant. And so going back to your 11 or 12-year-old self through to, as you said, you were playing with Ray as part of the project with Philip Glass. What sort of that 12 to 18 period, what education were you getting in music, let alone what you would do and playing as well?
I took piano lessons with a very special teacher. His name was Abby Frazier. And he's really old school, and he hated everything after Art Tatum. But I learned so much from him. He also was a master at teaching classical music and counterpoint. So I learned counterpoint and chord voicings and things from him. And he was, he was a huge influence. And I studied with Abby for many years. Also, I had little bands going along the whole time, starting in like 10th grade in high school. I had a quite good progressive rock band. We played Perpetual Change and Close to the Edge and Side 4 from Topographic Oceans and The Great Deceiver,
Wow.
Aqualung, Battle of Epping Forest. Anyway, on and on. We were full on prog cover band. And that was, I don't think there were too many, and we were kind of young too, but we were especially, it was especially the rhythm section. Those guys were really nailed. They sounded professional and made us sound like a real band. Anyway, that went through a few incarnations and names. At first it was called Five Part Invention. And then near the end, we had a different singer. We came up with a jokey name called Johnny Girder USA. But we stayed, and then after that came The Fence, which was more of a straight up fusion band, more or less influenced by the Dixie Dregs, the Bruford solo albums, and jazz rock stuff like Mahavishnu and the sort of bands. Trying to think of who else. The obvious heroes from that era. We were trying to do something similar to the Dregs in a way, but whereas they would sometimes break into something that was kind of a country, they would jump into a country tune or boom, bop, boom, bop, boom, bop. We tried to jump into legit jazz stuff, and I was still learning, so I sucked pretty hard, but we would play some blasting fusion tunes, and then we would play Donna Lee or a half baked version of Donna Lee, and then we would do our jazz rock version of Over the Rainbow, and on and on. We were trying to mix it up, but with a slight jazz flavor as opposed to the country flavor. And the band made its dent. I mean, we lasted for over 8 years.
Yeah.
And we went through a lot of rhythm sections. But if anyone wants to check out any of The Fence, there's a record still around called The Other Side, which I still recommend. It's still definitely some city kids who are into jazz fusion and drank a lot of coffee.
Love it. And I mean, I have to ask, Adam, I mean, going from, say, mid to late teenage years for those up to 8 years with The Fence, I mean, all right, you've mentioned a great piano teacher that's taught you a lot of the basic, well, not just basic, but the playing chops. But what you're showing there is a lot of wide knowledge of different genres of music. So were you picking that up from just who you were hanging out with? Like, how did you get such a broad knowledge of so many genres so early?
That's interesting. I never really no one's ever said that. I appreciate that, man. I think I take that as a compliment. I think maybe growing up on the sidelines of a creative record label certainly helped open up my mind a little bit. But I just liked a lot of stuff too, So I would check it out. I would hear a piano solo on the radio, and I'd want to check it out. I wouldn't necessarily learn it, but I would digest it, I suppose. And the progressive rock thing, that automatically is going to open you up to a number of different styles, because most of the better progressive rock mixes up different styles.
Yeah.
Not much comes back out of it, but a lot goes into it.
Absolutely.
Meaning that progressive rock is a genre where styles sort of go to die, but
I love it.
But it's made better for it.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great phrasing. I love it. And so, I mean, the fence, I mean, I don't want to skip over it too quickly, but the fence, obviously 8 years is impressive on its own, and we'll definitely link to the album. And so was it from there you moved to was it working with Randy Hall?
That was a side project. I was working in a music store selling keyboards, and I was very lucky. This was right around 1982, and this is when two things happened. Keyboards started to actually sound really good at this point. You have really nice systems. The sampling thing came into, much more things like the Fairlight and stuff like that were much more common. And I love the PPG Wave.
Yeah.
And the analog stuff like the Prophet 5 and the T8 and things like that were still around. And the Oberheim Matrix 6, Matrix 12, those are all Oberheim Expander. Those are all just beautiful sounding keyboards. As a matter of fact, you A/B them with most current sounds, especially something coming out of a plug-in or something like that. And they definitely did sound great. The other thing that happened when I was working in the music store was the MIDI revolution. Basically happened right under my nose. So I had a front row seat. Well, let's just say front in one of the first. Situations where I could mess around with all this stuff all day long and get paid for it. And I learned a lot about how MIDI systems work, how other more unusual systems worked. And that's something that makes it easier in the future to pick up on a new system. The Roland, the SQ something or other, they had, and also I really like the Oberheim system with the DMX drum machine and and PPG Wave. I still have. I don't know if I could. Oh, it's buried down there. I still have the old Wave term.
Wow.
And my PPG over here. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, there it is.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I gotta get. It needs some work done, but it's still there. Yeah. But so anyway, one of the people that came into the store was Randy Hall. He would swing by there, and he bought his Lin 9000 there, which was another interesting box. You don't see them around ever. It was a drum machine and a sequencer in one, and it was built like a big drum machine, and they sounded good. I wonder whatever happened to those things. I think a lot of these things, what happens is the chips die and people can't get it replaced. But so he came in and he liked the way I played, and I guess he liked the way I put sounds together. And so he hired me to do a recording session with him, and it worked out. And I did a bunch of sessions with him over the summer. He's my connection to Miles.
Yeah.
Because he's from Chicago, and he had a band with Miles's nephew, Vince Wilburn. Vince Wilburn plays drums, great drummer, and Randy, great vocalist and guitar player. And there are some other folks from that band that actually ended up in the Miles band. But anyway, so Miles knew him and wanted to do something more like Prince, I guess, for want of a better description. And so he wanted Randy to do some tracks with him. And so Randy said to me, I want you to do some tracks with me and Miles. So that was, for me, was probably the greatest opportunity I've ever had. And, I still, every year I write Randy a note thanking him for introducing me, because he was key to all this. Anyway, Miles flew in from New York and with Mike Stern, and we did a session, a very funky tune called Rubber Band. I don't know. It finally came out. It was finally issued in the early 2000s or 2020 or something like that. It came out way after the fact. But Miles really liked the sounds that I had, and he was really curious about the new technology. He was always like that. He was always interested in what the new technology was, going back to using the wah-wah and the trumpet, Fender Rhodes, RMI electric piano, the organ, the Yamaha organ that he played. So he was always interested in new technology and what that can do. And I was like, just like an apple that fell off the tree, ready to go. I knew enough music to understand what he was talking about chordally and stuff like that, but I was a blank slate when it came to sound and approach. And it was with Miles that I started to develop a sort of a atmospheric combination of comping and atmosphere. And he's definitely pushed me in that direction.
As you said, you're a blank slate. And obviously, we talked previously about how you had a wide knowledge of genres. So what was your perception of Miles Davis before meeting him? Obviously, he's revered. I mean, do you recall thinking, wow, this is another major step up? And those first couple of meetings, because he was renowned as a guy that knew what he wanted, and he would be very forthright about that. So just, interesting in that sort of perspective.
Well, what was interesting also is that he was very open to what a new guy would do. So he liked a lot of what I was trying out. It's when you've been in the band for a couple of years that you got to really up your game, you know. But he was fairly open-minded. Of course, he was a hero, and I had been following his recent stuff quite a bit too. We Want Miles, Star People, Decoy. You're Under Arrest. I already was into those albums. The song choices and things like that were kind of what I expected. And so he liked what I did at the recording session, and he asked me if I wanted to go to Europe with him in like 2 days. So he called his tour manager in New York and said, set this up for Adam. And I flew back to New York with him. And 2 days later, I flew to Europe with him for a 3-week tour. So I didn't have I had one short rehearsal with the band, and it was mostly to learn the new song Rubber Band. So my rehearsal with the band was more or less just figuring out what to do, on the spot and at sound checks. Which is not uncommon for how Miles did stuff. I mean, there was the phenomenal sax player, he's still around, Azar Lawrence, who the album Live at the Philharmonic, that was his audition.
Wow.
So he would do things like that, basically just throw you in to the burning cauldron and see what you come up with, and I guess he figured that I was moldable and could sort of mold me into something that was useful to him. He appreciated the atmosphere and the layers of sound and things like that. He loved the mini Moog bass too. I would sometimes double up on mini Moog bass, and he loved the sound of that.
And so, I mean, that initial 3 weeks in Europe, and when you say you initially rehearsed with the band for Rubber Band, so were you going over there as one of the primary keyboard player on that tour, or you were sort of going as another member of the ensemble to sort of learn your way?
Yeah, no, that was Morris. I was a second keyboard player.
Yeah, great.
As a matter of fact, I'll go out on a limb here, and I'm one of the few people that figured out how to make second keyboards work in a jazz context.
Please.
So anyway,
and how did you make that work? Because that's a fascinating. It's a really good point. So talk a little bit about how you feel that worked well.
Well, it's just a couple things. It's adding atmosphere when there's space for it. So if the primary keyboard player is comping on either organ or piano or Fender Rhodes, then the best thing to do is stay away from that completely. And don't necessarily do anything even that choppy. Do the atmospheric kind of thing. And then if the other keyboard player is doing something more languid or slow moving chords or something, or some kind of sound treatment, then I would play things like clavinet. I would do rhythmic instruments that weren't the same as the stuff that he's already doing. And then the other thing is, more so than the primary keyboard player, is I would double lines from the sax, bass, and guitar and Miles. So it was more of an orchestrational thing. So I was doubling lines here and there and doing the atmospheric stuff and trying to complement whatever else was going on and rhythmically stay out of the way. And it took me a long time to figure all this out. But yeah, and that still is my approach now. When I play with other people, I try to listen carefully to what else is going on, not other rhythm section players. I give them the space, because like Miles said, the reason why it sounded good is because you weren't playing. That's the one thing that everyone who played with Miles talks about, is his use of space.
I'm really interested sort of that early tour. I mean, obviously you progressed through to be Miles' musical director. So what was the evolution over those couple of years where you developed the trust, mutual trust, where suddenly you're playing an even more senior role in the band?
Well, it was actually more of a, I'll be completely honest, and I wasn't musical director. I was more like musical errand boy. I would chart out stuff. I'd sometimes go to his house and he'd play the piano and I'd record it, and then go home and transcribe it, and then nothing would happen to it, which is fine. And, it's a process. Sometimes some good stuff did come about, actually. Of course it would. But let's see. So I would write out parts. I'd record his ideas. I would put together charts for the band to follow. Like, so if there was one song called Intruder. It's on the live album. It's called Live Around the World. And he had about 8 or 9 fragmentary parts, just disparate parts. And Robert Irving figured out a nice order for the stuff to give it a nice structure is what I should say. And so I wrote out charts for that, So, it was more about recording, writing out charts, helping him with his ideas. It wasn't anything like, oh, well, Miles, I think we should do this.
Yeah.
It was more like, doing what he wanted me to.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I imagine some of those sessions where you're transcribing stuff. I mean, I assume sometimes he would be giving more minimalist instructions, make this more grey or particular rhythmic phrase. So how did you actually go about interpreting what he was actually asking you to do? Because that's no mean feat.
You just got to take a wild guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes he would say, Adam, subdivide some of it. So you try things that might mean that. And he was very patient. So if he can tell that you're trying to figure out what he's talking about, but not necessarily achieving it yet, he was cool. Usually we'd eventually get there, but it would be, if we were just to be like, oh, no, I know what to play. I got this. And didn't really pay attention. You had to watch him the whole time too. Always see what he's doing. His with the trumpet, he would give lots of cues and things just by playing a certain riff. So you got to pay attention. That was the name of the game.
And I mean, you've mentioned about watching him for cues, and I'll just dive into the live environment again for a minute with him. So, I mean, he was relatively well known for altering set lists or arrangements on the fly. So tell us about how you approach that, because that, again, is a major challenge. And obviously there's a lot of improvisation in a lot of music, but this is another whole level. How did you approach that?
The band in the 80s isn't really not the same thing as the bands from the mid 60s.
Yeah.
Or the Tony and Wayne and Herbie. I mean, forget it. That was 5-way improvisation.
Yeah.
At the highest level. What we were doing was more suitable for contemporary pop, rock, funk band.
Yeah.
But there was still some flexibility there. And I told you about the cue licks. Well, the songs would be a roadmap, but we wouldn't necessarily stay the same amount of bars in each given section. So we would have to wait for his cues to move on to the next section. So sometimes we'd play a section just very briefly, and then all of a sudden we're jamming out on a part we hadn't opened up before. Or sometimes it will be, really long time on one thing before he finally changes it, et cetera, et cetera. That was the that was the method, roadmaps. Creating a structure, but you don't know how long you're going to stay there. And that, even something like that, which a boneheaded rocker like me can actually wrap my head around, is really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you quite rightly mentioned the different eras. And I mean, obviously this was the era of, from a keyboard viewpoint, large keyboard rigs. What are your recollections of managing what you needed to deal with on stage and also in the recording process? I mean, you're dealing with some fairly decent range of keyboards and synthesizers and so on.
In the recording phase, especially at that time, it was more of like good old-fashioned MIDI layering.
Yeah.
And there was a point in time, it lasted for about 5 years, where a lot of, especially pop and rock recording sessions, you would have an engineer and a second engineer, and then a synth guy programming sounds. And this was before every keyboard had decent usable sounds already stored in it. You really needed to bring some people in that had a flair for it, or had all the latest samples from Emu, or what have you. There's a transitional kind of gig. It didn't last that long, but that was what I was getting into with Randy. That was the height of that kind of approach. On stage, I was doing a lot of strings and brass, and I used the the Oberheim expander in combination with Akai made a little sampler with these little discs, and it was really handy. So I did the two orchestra hits with that thing. It sounded great. Had a couple DX7s in a rack, and I tried to get away from the plinky sound of the DX7s and try to create sounds that are a little bit warmer and smoother. And the PPG Wave, of course, and the Mini Moog. Eventually, I ended up swapping out the Mini Moog for the Korg SV1 electric piano, not SV1. The new one is the SV1. That was the SG1.
Oh wow!
And
Okay.
it came out in the mid '80s, and it was, at the time, it would be equivalent. It had really, really, at least for live gigs, it had really, really good piano sound and stuff like that. So I would map the stuff out. I ran MIDI on all the modules all the time, and I had an array of foot pedals which I would crossfade, or sometimes just have one down and all the others off, or different combinations. So basically, my main keyboard, the DX7 or the SG1, would trigger everything. And you can get into a crossfading thing and stuff like that. And another thing you can't really do so easily anymore. So that was another the kind of unique approach that I was. What's cool about that is if you have a string part that's slowly building and the band is getting louder and louder, instead of just making your string part louder, bring in with the volume pedal a nice string sound an octave higher.
And so, I mean, obviously, Adam, you were part of Miles' band until about 1989, and then, you had another incredibly prolific part of your career. So I'm going to try and cover this as much as can, sort of the decade after that. So is it, I think after you left Miles, and we'll come on to your solo stuff in a little while, but was it Michael Petrucciani was your sort of next project that you joined?
It was, I was a fan of Michel
Michel, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. For a number of years, and the opportunity to work with someone like that was really rare. And he really wanted what I did. The concept was traditional piano trio with synthesizer orchestration or mood enhancement, whatever you want to call it. So I learned a lot during that project, and it sort of ran its course. We did it for about 2 years, and it was shortly after that I started playing with Chaka Khan.
Yeah.
And I loved that gig. I loved the music, and the band was just killer. Poochie Bell, Mike Campbell, all these great people. Anyway, Jerry Barnes,
wow,
Lisa Fisher. I mean, anyway, that was, I love that. It wasn't as personal a thing as the project with Michel was, but it was just so much fun to play that music, and play Chaka with a great band and great backup singers and everything. Anyway, I did play with Chaka for a couple of years, and then I sort of dovetailed then I think I was some downtime for a little while. Then I ended up, through my keyboard player friend Rachel Z. You know Rachel Z?
Yes. Yeah.
She played with Peter Gabriel. You would know her from that for sure. And Steps Ahead and a bunch of other projects. But she recommended me to play second keyboards for Wayne Shorter.
Wow.
This was the album, touring the album High Life. So that was recorded with an orchestra. So most of my gig was using Kurzweil 2000 to play orchestral, a lot of orchestral parts. And that was of course, another mind-blowing, life-changing gig, playing with Wayne Shorter, working with a guy that's a genius on that level is unreal. He was funny too. He was totally into movies and science fiction and spy movies and stuff like that. Sometimes he'd hide behind the corner and then come out, and anyway, guess you had to be there. It was pretty funny. But So Rachel suggested me for the Wayne Shorter project, and we did a pretty. I guess we worked for about a year, and then I was very fortunate to be recommended for Grover Washington,
Yeah.
and I love playing with Grover. I played with him from I guess 97 or 96 until he passed away in 2000. I played with him for like 3.5 years,
Yeah.
and yeah, I loved him. He was great. Again, the music was really fun. The band was great. I've been very fortunate. He's a great band leader, a sweetheart, one of my favorites. That was a great project. I'm on an album. It's I'm on a little bit of Sissy Strut. I did some loops with a wave station. And then I'm on the Christmas album he made, which is called Breath of Heaven. And he used his live band on like 2 songs on that. So yeah, I play with Grover, and then, super fortunate to be kind of accepted into more hardcore straight ahead jazz scene. I started playing with Wallace Roney, the trumpet player. He passed away near the beginning of COVID,
Right.
but he was Miles's protege.
Right.
He had a really, really creative approach and wrote really great material, stuff like that. He was great. And I played with him off and on for like 6 years. And that was another situation where I just learned so much, about how to move triads and fourths around in a way that bends the harmony, but not too much, using intervallic ideas for soloing rather than what I would gravitate towards, maybe a blues lick or something like that. So, and he wanted me in the band because I wasn't a bebop player.
Yeah.
He wanted something more closer to the electronic side of Herbie or Chick, something like that. So anyway, so go ahead.
And you've raised a really good point, Adam, that I hadn't planned on asking, but you've talked about band leaders. So obviously Miles is a band leader, Chaka is a band leader, Grover, and I think you did some work with Robin Ford at some stage too during the 90s, yeah? And
yeah,
not a lot?
I played not a lot. He played with Miles, which
yeah.
I had a chance to work with him more closely then, but he did hire me for a couple of gigs in LA. And it was me and a sax player recreating a horn section.
Yeah.
So he wanted this sort of a bluesy horn section, like B.B. King or something like that. So
right. Yeah.
So I did that, but it wasn't like I was his key. Russell Ferrante was playing keys, and what do you,
it makes sense.
He's a master. Yeah.
He is, yeah. And so across those different band leaders, and I have no doubt they all had totally different approaches, given that in the 90s you're about to start leading your own bands and projects, what did you learn from any of them as band leaders on how to manage a team of musicians to get to a common goal?
Okay. Well, I can just take a few stabs at it.
Yeah.
With Miles, I learned that if there's someone important to the band, even if you have problems with them, accommodate them and figure out, because the music, like as Miles used to always say, music has no friends. So you got to get the right guy, and if the right guy ends up being a pain in the ass, I would be surprised. Miles would, and other great band leaders I've seen would, just deal with it. And in the long run, it was worth it. Miles would, his whole way of throwing you into the deep end, but at the same time being supportive and being open to new ideas, and at the same time sticking to his guns, all that kind of stuff. The main lessons I learned were probably mostly from Miles. I mean, the opportunity, to play something like, to play with someone like that. I mean, it doesn't, you're not really, no one's at a higher level than that, So a lot of what I know about band leading, I learned from Miles.
I assume, I haven't seen interviews, but I assume in 89 when you decided to move on, that was an amicable thing between you two. He'd moved on to another whatever within the bounds you're happy to discuss. What led to sort of the change for you moving on?
Yeah, well, this might sound kind of weird now, but I felt I was with him for 4 years, from 85 to 89. And I felt, as other people who've been in the band would attest, I felt the winds of change starting to blow. And I decided I wanted to get out while I had the opportunity with Michel rather than stick around and then end up I don't know where. But so I wanted to control in a lot. I wanted to control my exit from the band and keep busy. It was a tough decision.
Mm-hmm.
After I made it, I tried to backtrack on it and I wasn't able to. And I've kind of wrestled with it off and on, how things might have been different if I had stuck with Miles to the very end. Because the fact is, after I left the band, he was only around for about another year and a half.
Yeah.
So I don't know how things might have been different, but for my own musical growth and for having control and being able to live the rest of my life without being fired by Miles.
Yes.
Was at the time seemed, and it still does. I mean, still in the long run, probably outweighs.
Yeah.
The extra year of touring that may or may not have happened.
That's right.